All right, Matthew Clark, made in Philadelphia, winning script at the Crime Mystery Film Festival. Give us a pitch. What's this? What's Made in Philadelphia about?
So it is about a housemaid who cleans houses in the Fishtown sect. Now, made in Philadelphia. So it's the untold true story of Phil Leonetti, who real life story, true guy, underboss of the Philadelphia crime family in the 80s, most violent crime family in history. I mean, just wild. Single-handedly became an informant to get out of the life. Took down the Philadelphia mob. In return, that convinced Sammy Gavato to take John Gotti down. Essentially he took down the mob as what it was back in its heyday, and it's never recovered since then. So this story has never been told incredibly, which is like unbelievable that I had a chance to write this. And yeah, that's what it's about. So it's untold true story, the Philadelphia Mafia, um, and basically how the mafia, came apart. So it's pretty wild. And thank you for having me on too, and also for everything you've done with the festival and all the opportunities. It's fantastic to meet you and to be a part of it amongst all the other great folks that have submitted their work. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
So thank you. I want to get into the writing of the script in a second, but I want to talk about the idea or the script itself. So, true story, Phil Leonetti. So we had Goodfellas, right? So Goodfellas, it was about a guy who kind of turned states most of the time, or at least what we learn in films and TV from Sopranos, etc., is that people flip. They call it flipping, I guess,
Yeah, he
is
flipped.
because they get a drug charge. They're gonna get arrested for a high criminal sentence. They usually just don't go to the FBI and say I'm going to churn. So what was this guy's motivation to churn to flip?
Well, this is the beautiful part of this story is unlike Goodfellas, he's kind of an anti-Henry Hill. So Henry Hill, turned and became a turncoat and he flipped when he got pinched.
Yeah,
Phil Leonetti, who's still alive and there's still a $500,000 bounty on his head. He's in hiding right now. I was fortunate enough to speak with him and the director of the FBI that's in charge. I'm sorry, the FBI director that was in charge at the time. I
at the
spoke
time,
with
yeah.
him and the author of the book with Phil Leonetti, Scott Bernstein, not Phil Leonetti himself. He's in hiding. And unlike Henry Hill, he wanted to get out of that life. He couldn't wait to get out. His uncle, Nicky Scarfos, Nicodemo Scarfo, inherited the role after they killed Angelo Bruno in 1980. And then another guy came in and he just ended up hating his uncle. His uncle was just ruthless, violent. He hated the life. It really wasn't for him. So he decided to um, get out of there and eventually talk to the FBI after his uncle did some really horrible stuff. Um, and he was able to convince his friend, Sammy Gravano, who was John Gotti's underboss, to become a turncoat too. Now, Gotti's Sammy Gravano, that's not what the script's about, but he is in there a little bit.
Yeah.
He was in a lot of shit. So essentially, by cooperating, he was able to leave this life and put a lot of people in jail that did terrible things that were supposed to be there, became free, and he's the only guy I can think of that left the mafia unscathed. I mean, ultimately, it's like the priesthood. It's when you die or you you're not out until you're dead kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or the mob, you're guaranteed to end up in jail or dead. It's just the odds are the odds, and he got out of it unscathed. And it's a incredible story, incredible guy, and it's true. So yeah, it's a long answer. I'm sorry,
As
but
an
that's that.
Italian, as
He's
an
Italian.
Italian
Yeah,
myself, you ratting or basically being a rat is probably the worst thing you can possibly do.
right. Yeah,
Right.
it's the worst. You just
But so
you might as
he is a rat, but he's the hero of your story, I guess, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, he is, and it's told from the point of view, his point of view. And if you look on paper at what Nicky Scarfo did, I mean, just
Yeah.
like I said, the Philadelphia crime family in the '80s, the most violent. His whole motto was go out there gun blazing like the Wild West, shoot them all dead in the street. I mean, it was like a murder every weekend,
He was a
and they
sociopath. Yeah.
complete sociopath. And Phil Leonetto, grew up in that life, But I mean, he had to go help his uncle bury somebody that when he was like 9 years old in the pickup truck, and he grew up in that life. But it's interesting. It's like Henry Hill, Goodfellas. It's like the opposite of that, and it's just yeah, it's just one of those stories that took me. I'm a sketch comedy writer. I haven't written anything serious in my life, and this idea came to me, and I researched it, and I just like, yeah, it's been the greatest thing. So really hoping to, get this guy made and tell this story. It's an incredible story.
So you're talking you talked before like you've done sketch comedy, you've done sitcom writing, and then you're from Philadelphia though, right? So you have a little bit of emotional kind of
Yes, big
point.
time. Yeah, I live in Los Angeles now, and I grew up in Philadelphia. I lived there till I was about 27, and Philadelphia, it just has so much history there. I mean, outside of the organized crime, it's just such
Yeah.
a lovely city,
Well, Birth of
historically.
America, right?
Right? Yeah, seeds of democracy, and um, yeah, it hasn't never been told, and it's fascinating. The story. I mean, if told right, it could really make an impact. So yeah, yeah, from Philadelphia, so it holds a really special place in my heart. Um, and growing up, I was a kid when all this took place, so I didn't really know about it, but I do remember on the news, and you hear your parents talk about like, oh, it's Nicky Scarfo on the news again, and all this stuff. It's kind of crazy. It was right in your backyard.
Okay, so you got this idea, and then you're from Philadelphia. True story. So where do you begin? Like, what's the seed of writing this script? You mentioned that you talked to Phil. You talked to it was
Not Phil.
based
That
on a
that was
book.
a misquote. I'm sorry. I talked to the author that co-wrote the
The
book
author.
Mafia Prince
Okay,
with Phil, who was like talking with Phil in proxy,
gotcha.
and then the FBI agent I did reach out to, and I found him. I mean, I had to dig a little bit because he doesn't put his name out there.
Yeah,
His name's Jim Marr. He was gracious enough to tell me some stuff that wasn't in the book that I could add in my screenplay. So it was like,
but it's not an ad. It's not a true adaptation of the book, though, right?
no, no, it's just the book I sourced, and the writer Scott Bernstein, who I can't say enough great things about, has been really supportive with this idea. It was one of the books I sourced for this, amongst FBI reports and basically a lot of things put together, and then you add a little bit of flair to it as you do. But if I may, the reason I wrote this was um, there's this kind of gag with my wife where there's a movie called Zootopia. I don't
Yeah,
know if you remember that a
yeah,
few
the
years
animation
back.
film, right? Yeah.
Right. It's classic. But I thought of that idea like 6 months before that trailer came out. And I told my wife, and she's like, oh, that's cute. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And then that movie came out, which is very similar. And I was like, oh, they stole it. Whatever. Things
But they
happen.
were making the film before, like,
Right, of course. So
yeah.
so then I thought of another one. It was like, oh, we need to do one on Napoleon. Like that's never been done right. And then like Ridley Scott came out. And then there was another one. I forget what it was, but I'm like, I had all these ideas that like were never done. Whether they would have been good or not, it's a different story. But it was just one
Because
of
it's
those
just an
things.
idea. You haven't, it wasn't executed, but
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So then I was watching The Irishman, the Martin Scorsese movie on Netflix, and a lot of that takes place in Philadelphia, and some of the characters in there are in my screenplay. And I said to my wife, it's like, they've never done a movie about the Philadelphia Mafia. There's like so much gold there. And she's like, write it. You got to write it right now. Don't let it sit. So I went out, I went on Amazon, I ordered a bunch of books on the subject, and I spent the next year
Wow.
writing that and researching it. And then as soon as it was done, I was like, get a copy written. And then I started shooting it out to all the festivals. And I never really expected anything to happen with it. I was just happy to accomplish that. But the fact that it's very humbling. I practice a lot of humility that it's doing very well. So I'm hoping that we can go to the next big thing. But yeah, so long story short, that's how it was, or short story long, that's how the genesis of the screenplay came about.
That's an interesting story, but like you were saying, like obviously mafia stories, like you wrote down on the blog interview that you've seen The Godfather the most times in your life.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
a lot. I mean, God, it's not even my favorite movie. It's probably like my second favorite movie. My favorite movie is The Passion of the Christ. Not that I watch that a lot, but because of the feeling it gave me. I was very impressed that a movie could invoke such emotion.
Yeah.
But in terms of like longevity, there's not a better movie than The Godfather, I think. It's a perfect film, you know? So I've watched that a lot, as I'm sure you have. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm assuming
What's that?
that you like The Godfather. I assume everybody likes it, but some people don't.
Well, of course, I've seen The Godfather, but Sopranos, like I've probably seen that
Yeah.
more than anything in my life.
Really?
I watch that more than any other thing, TV movies in my life. So
Oh, no, it's the best TV show ever.
yeah,
I think. I think it's like Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and The Wire. It's that's
yeah,
like in that order. It's
yeah.
like you just don't get better than
I'll
that.
put Mad Men in there
Yeah.
in that mix, but that's just me.
Yeah. Maybe Sons of Anarchy first two seasons. Like it depends, but it's
Yeah.
yeah. Sopranos is great. Oh, I love it.
So funny enough, I don't know if you gotten this parallel before, but you know what your script reminded me of?
Mm-mm.
Valkyrie, the movie Valkyrie,
Oh, really?
because it's sort of like
Interesting.
it's I know it's different because it's about a person who's like in the mix of something, right? This
Yeah.
powerful organization called, called the Third Reich or the
The
Nazi.
Third Reich, yeah.
Yeah, and he's basically has a moral compass, and he's like, you know what?
Oh, good
Something doesn't
call.
feel right here. I'm gonna try to do something about it, right?
Yeah.
And basically, and of course, we know
Good
that
call.
fails in that movie because they went on. So he's like, I gotta do something about that, and he starts trying to recruit, right?
Right.
He's got to pick his spots because
Oh, that's good.
right. And it
Yeah.
reminded me of that's what this reminded me of because it's about this guy who has a moral, and it's like and go back to Sopranos where Tony, if it was a Hollywood movie or like David Chase wasn't David Chase, that's what would happen in Sopranos, right? But then of course he
Right.
right?
Good call. That's I never thought about it. And I love that movie too. I
Yeah.
love World War II more than except for the Civil War, maybe any other part in US history.
Yeah.
And it fascinates me. And I do like that movie a lot. I never thought about that, but it's true. It's like the lone guy that's trying to recruit. He's in a bad he's on the wrong side, but he's trying to
Yeah.
do the right
He
thing.
knows he's on the wrong side of the law, right? Like or
Right.
he's the
Yeah.
bad guy. If it's a movie, he's the villain, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that, like I said, in like Sopranos, that's where you think it's going. Like, say, of course, we've watched the whole series, but like, say,
Right.
like you're 1999, you're watching the first season. It's like, here's a guy trying to get better, right?
Right. Right.
Right?
Yeah, you root for him, even though they're like terrible people.
Yeah,
They never. It's like Scarface. You don't.
yeah,
He's a terrible guy, but he never hurt anyone that didn't deserve it in that respect. So you like root for him, and I feel like Valkyrie. It's like, well, he's killing the worst evil with a lesser evil, and it works.
yeah,
He's trying to recruit people. But yeah, that's I'm gonna have to rewatch that. That is a good flick.
yeah. So it has that kind of moral compass parallel, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Definitely a moral
oh,
compass that Phil Leonetti is dealing with. And
yeah,
he's just trying to, um, one, he wants to get out of that life. And two is he's kind of earned it. He's done a lot of things for his uncle. His uncle really is off the rails. I mean, he wouldn't have lasted long. He had some support with the Genovese family, one of the five New York families. And that kind of kept him in there a little bit. But I mean, he was going down. Regardless, Nicky Scarfo and Phil, he just wanted to be out of that life. And yeah, just awful, awful guy.
so he could be wherever, I guess, right? He's a witness protection.
Right. Yeah. He's still in witness protection. He's the Philadelphia Mafia has cooled down. It's ran right now by Joey Merlino, who says he doesn't run it, but he runs it. And it's the most of the guys are dead from that era. I mean, there's still a few alive, but they're in prison. But it's yeah, he's worried about. He said this in interviews. That's why I'm quoting this. He's worried about the kid and the upcoming kid in the family that wants to make a name for himself, and people aren't actively looking for him, but he's old enough where he can just stay out of there, stay out of the public life. And after he left, he lived in Florida for a while and ran some businesses. I think so. He made some money and like has a good life. Oh, all things considered.
Okay, so your wife is like, you got to write this script, and you're like,
Gotta
okay,
write this script.
get out there, and you're like researching. But at the same time, it's like we like in these situations where based on real life, people tend to over research. They tend to fall in
Big
love with the
time.
research and not in love with the writing.
Right.
I don't know if that was you, but I'm saying that basically, what
Yeah.
kind of like do you give yourself like a timeline? Like, what's your preparation to write this?
It's the weirdest thing. Like the so when we talked about watching The Irishman and saying there's never been a thing about the Philadelphia crime family, I didn't know I was going to be talking about Phil Leonetti. I've only really heard of him. I didn't know much about him. I was going to focus on like Joey Merlino in the
Okay,
'90s and that stuff. So the first book I read was called The Last Gangster by George Anastasia, I believe, and it was about the crime family Philadelphia from the early '90s to today, or 15 years ago, I guess. And I was like, I'm going to write this. And I read that book and did some research. And then I read Mafia Prince about Phil Leonetti and Nicky Scarfo. And I was like, oh no, this is it. This is like the wildest story I've ever heard. And it's just like a beautiful story of redemption. And so yeah, I started researching that. I decided that was what I was going to base the screenplay on. And then I went down the rabbit hole with that. I read everything I could find. I watched, I mean, interviews from the 80s. I found some really, really bad quality like council meetings where they were talking about. I mean, I did a deep dive. When I found the FBI agent, I found him through his name was on a donor sheet for a church. And I like he had to email a church and was like, if you know him, can you let him know I'm a screenwriter? Like it was amazing I even found him. So it was like this whole deep dive. And what you said about the research, yeah, I was like, this is just fascinating to read about. And I was like, oh, I still got to like write this screenplay. So when I wrote the screenplay, it was too long to use. It was like 300 pages, so I whittled that down to the shortest time. I was like, Goodfellas is 160. I went down to like 152 or whatever. So I was like, it's submittable. I'm not comparing it to Goodfellas. I'm just saying that was like my catalyst. Like, well, that's a longer film. So that's kind of what I did was I just whittled it down and whittled it down. Um, I forget who said it, but they said like, if you think you got it, cut more out. Like the audience is smart. They know you don't need to over explain things. And I felt like that's what I was doing. So I went through like 4 or 5 drafts before I
so
got
how
the
many
final
pages is it
one.
now?
It's 152. A
That's
lot
a
of
that's
it,
a long screenplay. That's a long spec screenplay.
it's a long one. Yeah. A lot of that is maybe 10 pages of that or montage things. It can be shorted down. I feel like a studio, if they bought that, they would cut out pretty much the most of the first act altogether. I did spend time on his childhood growing up. I felt like with Goodfellas and A Bronx Tale, a lot of these mafia films, they focus on the
Yeah,
early years.
yeah.
And I feel like a movie like Black Mass, the Whitey Bulger story, directed by Scott Cooper, they cut all that out, and that movie worked beautifully. So I feel like that's probably the route I would go. I did get some feedback from you and your folks about cutting some of it down. So I am working on going through another draft and seeing kind of what fat can be taken out. Just it's kind of tough to
Yeah.
do. But yeah, it is definitely on the longer side, but I feel like it's a quick read.
But like if it's spec and you're like want to sell it, then it's the difference between the shooting script and the sell. You know what I mean? Like you can
Yeah.
always bring it back to the longer version, right? So
Right. Yeah. Shooting script will have to be probably cut down by about 30 pages or so just to make it just from like a budget standpoint, I guess. But there's a lot I feel like somebody on the outside reading it,
yeah.
that had creative control over it, they could probably cut a lot out. It's just it's just the pacing's really well, goes really well. So it's kind of tough. But yeah, I mean
Well,
there's absolutely always room for improvement and room to
you
cut
mentioned
stuff
the
out.
last Scorsese movie, the Netflix one.
Yeah, yeah. The Irishman.
The Irishman. Was that
Right.
4 hour movie? Like how long was that movie?
Yeah. Yeah, it was like 3 hours or something. Um
I think it was
which
longer than that. I just
it,
that movie just went on and on.
the movie went on for a long time. Uh it, it's funny because it was released. I think it was. I'm trying to find out how long. 209 minutes. So it's a long one.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
it's basically 3 hours and 49 minutes, right?
right, right, and it's
Sorry, 59 minutes. But go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, no, that's a very ambitious movie. I feel like if you weren't Scorsese, you couldn't get away with
No,
that, and it would have to be a mini series at that point.
but then
I'm
that said, The Brutalist, that Adrian Brody movie that's
eh,
nominated for an Oscar, that's 3.5 hours long.
with an intermission too. It's
Yeah,
like I don't remember the last time I saw an intermission in a movie theater. Maybe Schindler's List. It's yeah, it's long.
that's a long
What do you
movie.
make about that? Do you think a long movie hurts?
No, not these
Or
days.
you do
Live
think
in
it does
the
hurt it?
we live in the era of, as you know, is like you got your podcast. We live in the era of like the 10-second videos in the 2 hour podcast, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the long movie, because people are not like, let's be honest here, right? People are not watching The Brutalist at the cinema. They are, but they're most of them aren't. So they're not
No,
going to
they're not.
watch it all in one shot, and
No.
they're probably like texting on their phone while they're watching it too.
Yep.
Like I'm just like that's
Yeah.
not good, but it's just like that's just like so meaning that like that's what we do with podcasts, right? We just like it's in their background and we listen to it.
That's the beauty of it. You can do other things and stop and go.
And then people are binge watching like shows that like they're watching 4 episodes of Dexter or whatever, which is 4 hours, right? So
Right. I always mention that too, my own podcast. It's like The Irishman, it's too long. Hang on while I binge watch 8 hours
yeah,
of
exactly.
whatever. It's like, well, is it too long? I don't think it is. I guess for a sitting theater, it's too long, but
Yeah. So that's that's
theater
that's my
experience.
rationalization to the long like it's basically
It makes sense.
we live in that era, right? So
Right. 10-second videos. They talked about that the other day on something I was watching where, it's like 10-second videos. There is still a need for books and things like that, but it's like the attention span is just not there. And I have ADHD, so I'm like, yeah, it is tough, but there's so much like, there's something for everybody, I guess. What I'm trying to say.
okay, so you basically so you how long so you spent a whole year on this just working on the script?
Oh, like yeah, like from beginning to end, from the idea of conception to it's going to festivals. It was just under a year.
And then
Yeah.
how long did you you researched like for a couple months and then you just started like you kind of blueprinted the plot points like how what was your like how did you do it?
Yeah, exactly. Research for about 6 months. I just kept notebooks and I just write every interesting thing down that would be applicable. And then when I was done, I kind of reread everything again and tried to map the dots of first act, second act, third act, and protagonists. And a lot of mafia movies are very men centric. There's very
Yeah.
few female roles. I mean, unless it's fictional like Casino, where you have like a whole role for Sharon Stone, or whatever she was based on. It's tough to find strong female leads in a nonfiction historical mafia settings because it's a male organization. So I did try to do a lot of research on that, and Phil Leonetti's wife was very very brave and strong and like
Yeah.
true Philly woman, and so I beefed up her role a little bit and had to do some research there.
Because she's got to be a part of it, right? Like hidden making this decision, she's got to be part of the decision.
Big time, yeah, and was super supportive. And I mean, there's a part where the FBI agent says, like, by the way, now that he's in witness protection, a van um, will come to your house tomorrow, a moving van at 3 a.m., and agents will help you unload everything. And then I think they went to like Scranton, Pennsylvania, and then somewhere else, or the Poconos, then to Florida. I mean, it was very like, and she was very, like, I'm here for you, and just incredible. Really supportive, really, really incredible to see that kind of support for kind of upending your life like that.
Because like
Uh,
because it's always fascinating. Like you talked about the female characters like Karen, like Karen Hill, and she had a pretty prominent role in Goodfellas. And it's like
yeah,
they choose the life too, right? Well, we learn in The Sopranos, they're just as bad as the mafia boss, right? The wife,
right.
right? Because they're choosing the life too, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're benefiting from it and choosing it, and like they know what's going on. So yeah, it's interesting. And because Phil Leonetti is Nicky Scarfo's nephew, his they had the same nuclear family members and the
Yeah.
same grandmother, so uh, they weren't like a terrible family. Like they were involved in a terrible organization, but they weren't all like awful people. But Nicky Scarfo was like a sociopath, so it's interesting to see them try to maintain their life around him when you're like we're dealing with this crazy. Um, I also got a chance when I went um, took a few trips since I wrote this back to Philadelphia and looked at some of the locations. And a lot of the script takes place in Atlantic City because that's where they, Scarfo's like base was before he became the boss. And that's where they live. That was the Scarfo compound on, I think it was Georgia Avenue. It's still there. It looks the exact same. I mean, it's amazing that they haven't really changed a lot of these places. I mean, some of the businesses in the script are there, but or have changed, but it still looks the same. It's like interesting. I don't know why I'm bringing that up. I guess my point was it'd be easier to film in some of those spots, and also gives you kind of a sense of what it was like then to see that. I mean, the streets, like it's all right there, same architecture and everything. It was really
Do
really interesting
you
40
get
years
into
ago.
the minutia of like how they made a living and what they actually Mafia actually did?
Yeah, like I went into the so on paper they have to have something for the government. So they
Yeah,
had, the shell corporations and um they had Scarf Inc. and I mean all these names that they did like a rebar company and construction company and they were just fronts for, you know, hiding their money and how they did that. But like what I really found out was how many corrupt folks they had on their side. Like they had council members,
yeah.
like politicians on the take. And I mean, they got away with a lot of stuff then. I think a lot of that too is technology. I mean, you can't pull that today. There's a camera everywhere. Everything's done on a phone. Like you're not, that's why they're a fraction of what they were 40 years ago. But it was a cash business then. And yeah, minutia was, just, it was all about money. There's no, from what I've
How are
read
they
and everything.
making like how are they making their money? Like what are
So
they
racketeering is the big illegal sources, gambling. Um,
gaming's legal now, right? So
right. Yeah. They were running like, I mean, there was gambling for in Philadelphia, and some of those rackets for everything. I mean, it was just people gambling on football scores and things like that, underground gambling, loan sharking, a lot of racketeering, stolen goods, things like that was how they really made a lot of their money. Um, the big thing with the the take and the money was how they. I was very curious of how they funneled it, and like I said, it was a lot of these companies that just
yeah,
bullshit companies, and but the politician thing. The reason I brought that up was they would influence them to give them contracts for the city. So like when Atlantic City started building casinos in the late '70s, um, Nicky Scarfo was immediately, had the gun to the head of whoever and saying, you have to give us the contract. So they would get the $1 million contract for building these casinos. So the mob basically built Atlantic City in the terms of the construction.
yeah.
And they were making millions of dollars. Like by 1983, they didn't know what to do with all the money. Like they had offices, like it was crazy. And then it just started going downhill. People got indicted and people flipped and I mean, you can only keep up with that life for so long. I mean, if it's corrupt, it's going to catch up with you.
Well,
But it's incredible.
you like to think so, but it's funny that there's a I think
You like to think so.
there's a guy who's the president, your president right now, who built casinos in Atlantic City. So one would
Right?
assume he was involved with these people, right?
He never came up in any of the research.
Yeah,
He came in later in the 80s, I think. I mean, the casinos started getting built. I think the first one was, I mean, don't quote me on this. I think it was Showboat or Golden Nugget, one of them in like 77. But come around like 82, 83.
yeah,
Yeah, there's definitely lines have crossed for sure.
yeah. It's interesting, right?
Who
So
knows? That's a really good point. Um, his name didn't come up in anything, but I mean, also you know who's to say?
Well, there's a
Atlantic
man
City
who
is a
never
shell
talks
of
on
what
the
it is.
phone and never writes anything down, and you know,
Right.
right?
It's
So,
true.
and
Yeah.
nothing's documented, nothing can be proven, right? So,
No, exactly. No paper trail.
yeah,
Also, too, it's a shame because Atlantic City, they never pumped any money into the infrastructure of the city like Vegas did.
yeah,
So they just put all the money back into the casinos. So the whole area fell apart around them.
yeah,
That's why it's such a, it's a dilapidated area outside the casinos where Vegas put money into the universities and it can sustain itself now. They didn't do that then. So it kind of,
Vegas is a like it's a family friendly environment now, right? So,
right. Yeah. Good colleges, good medical universities.
yeah,
I mean, they're bringing sports teams
I was
there.
gonna say they got all the sports teams now, right?
Right. Yeah. It's something more than just gambling there where AC, they just cannibalized on the casino profits. So
Short term thinking,
what's that?
short term thinking, like they were,
Right.
again, they were just
Exactly.
thinking about the moment, right? So,
Yeah. Last thing I'll say too about that was one of the things that I went down a rabbit hole when I was doing the parts of the script in Atlantic City was Boardwalk Empire because they talked kind of about how Atlantic City was like a world class destination in the early 20th century.
yeah,
It was called the world's playground, and people from everywhere would go there before casinos. I mean, and they didn't really pump money into the city then that they could have. And it kind of became a shit show in the 60s by the time the 50s and 60s hit. And then the casinos came and that breathed like a whole nother life into Atlantic City. And they never really learned from their past. And they just, it's a shame, because it'll never really get to where it could have been, I think, again, unless something dramatic's put there.
yeah.
But like they never really learned from their, past mistakes. It's kind of sad.
So okay, so this is obviously the great story. So tell me about the story with
Thank
like
you.
calling talking to the FBI agent and like talking. Did you talk to him on the phone?
We talked via email.
Okay.
He didn't call me or anything. He was fine with email, and he
Yeah.
basically issued a lot of notes. He said that I asked him a lot about the trials in the book in the screenplay. Uh, what was because after you arrested Nicky Scarfo and you put this operation, what were you doing after he was in jail? And he said they were very worried about witness intimidation and Nicky Scarfo going after witnesses because he beat the case. He beat the rap a few times, so they really wanted to like lock him in and get him into jail for life. So they really bugged what they could. They interviewed everyone and they tried to keep an eye on witnesses and protecting them, and they did a very good job. They was able to successfully prosecute him. But he gave me insight on what they looked at, how they worked with Phil, kind of some timelines, and it was really interesting. I mean, just I thought he's a hero. He served his country and put some really bad people in jail. This FBI agent, and I was really gracious to have the chance to talk to him. And he's long retired from the bureau,
And
but
these guys don't take like curtain calls, right? Like they do their
no,
job and they retire and they don't
yeah,
nobody knows who they are, right? So
right. I told him too, like you should really. Well, you don't need to do anything. You've done a lot, but
yeah.
you could really capitalize off some books and I mean, you got a lot to say and you just don't see him anywhere. He's just done with the bureau and his partner who was also in the screenplay passed away a few years back, but I asked about him and he just said he was a great guy to work with and they were a good team and I mean, the thing that blew my mind was back then we didn't have cell phones and the computer technology we did. It was all paper reports and running from here to there. And it's just a lot of extra work of things we take for granted. They would have to do like, you know, analog kind of systems and things like that. Um, so it's difficult, but yeah, um, interesting guy, interesting story too,
So
truly.
you got the script written, it's getting winning some awards, so you want to get this produced, right? Like this is not like a showcase of your writing talent. It is, but at the same time you want someone to pick this up. You want to get this made.
Absolutely, yeah. The goal is, I mean, if it were blue sky, have it produced and um, I mean, I feel like it's a story that needs to be told. I feel like it would be very successful. I feel like I mean there is a big market for this kind of
Yeah.
story. It's underrepresented in a lot of ways. Hasn't been told. In the back of my mind, I always thought Vincent Piazza would be a great Phil Leonetti. He was in
I was going to
Boardwalk.
ask you, that was one of my last questions, who could play him, but go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So he looks like Phil Leonetti. He's Italian. He would be perfect for the role. And I
Yeah.
always thought Scott Cooper would be a great director. Scott did uh, Crazy Heart. He did Black Mass. He did Hostels. But it's like the way he directed Black Mass, the 2016 movie with Johnny Depp about Whitey Bulger, that was gritty. And like, I feel like that would be perfect look for this story. Um, but yeah, I'm open to anything. I feel like the story, it really should be told. And I just hope and pray that it can see the, see the next step, see the next big thing.
Gotcha. Well, last question. I had you on for long. We're doing
No,
this
thank you.
podcast day before this. We'll record it. We'll show it afterwards. But it's day before the Super Bowl, right? It's
Yes.
from Philadelphia. I heard that they're in the Super Bowl. Do you
This
have
is true.
do you
This
have
is
any?
true.
They're yeah against my hated team, the Chiefs.
Do you hate the Chiefs?
Well, I'm a Buffalo Bills fanatic, so
Oh, yeah. You're in good company. My boss is a big Buffalo Bills fan, and yeah, we were both heartbroken. Um, I don't like the Chiefs at all. I just, Andy Reid was the coach for the Eagles
exactly,
for
yeah.
10 years, and he
Yeah.
sucked. And he goes to Kansas City, and all of a sudden he's like Mr. Super
No, no,
Bowl.
he was good. See, like that's like that's Philadelphia sports fan revisionist history. He was a great coach for Philadelphia. He was
Yeah, he brought us to the playoffs a lot.
he
He
was
was the most winning coach in history, but
I
we
think
can
he was
never win a
an
Super Bowl.
underachieving quarterback, and I think that he did very good for you guys.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah,
Win one for Andy. He's won a few already.
yeah.
So the Chiefs are so good. I mean, they're like unbeatable at
They're
this
actually
point.
not. That's the thing. They're not that good. But
No, they
basically,
can be beat.
they
There
know
are
how to win the close games.
they right. They're a beatable team. But they do have that, they always win by like a field goal or some
Yeah.
nonsense of like 3 points. I just hope we don't have that again.
So you have a
Uh,
prediction for tomorrow.
yeah, the Chiefs are going to win like
Oh, they are going to
29.
win.
Yeah, I'll be heartbroken. I'll be rooting for the Eagles. Miracle if the Eagles win, but I think the Chiefs will win 29-26.
Okay.
I hope I'm wrong.
I have a feeling that the Eagles are going to win. They're just going to give it to Barkley like 30 times and
Give it to him.
just keep giving it to him, right?
Whatever he's worth, every cent. Give him whatever he wants.
Give it to him. Just give like you know what
Do
I
it.
mean? 8 in the box, I don't care. Just keep
Keep
giving
doing
him
it.
the ball, right? Because he's like Barry Sanders in a sense where like he's just
Yeah.
one of them is gonna get away, right? Like he's just gonna
Yep. He
force them to stop him, right? And then he can start working on the because you got good receivers, right?
Yeah, yeah. You do know he does remind me of Barry Sanders
Yeah.
too, back in the day.
Yeah, just first quarter, just don't even
Get
throw
him
the
out
ball. Just
there.
give it to him every time, and then and it's forcing the Chiefs to like put 9 in the box. Then you can start playing around, right? So
Right. Yeah. Good call. I hope the Eagles win and just give it to Barkley and
just give it
they're
to
they're
him.
due. They're definitely due. And it's like the New England Patriots back in the Tom Brady era. It's like everybody's stacked against the Chiefs. It's just like it's too much anymore.
Yeah,
It's obnoxious.
yeah, especially when they beat the Bills. But basically,
The worst. Yeah.
who
Bills.
everybody wants to see in the Super Bowl, right?
There'd
Anyways,
be nobody better. Like Josh Allen. I mean, just that whole team. Like no team deserves it more. I mean, it's like
exactly.
people might say the Browns because they never won.
No,
No, the
because
Bills.
you guys already got your miracle Super Bowl, right? From like 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Or you guys
2016.
already got
Get
yours, but I think you're gonna win. I think you're gonna win tomorrow
Thank you.
because
Thank you for having me too.
Philadelphia fans are the funniest fans, right? Because obviously you're
The
notorious
worst.
for booing Santa Claus, but
Right.
like you guys hate your
Santa.
coach, but he's a good it's so funny. Like he's a good
Who,
coach, but
Sirianni?
yeah,
I love him. I met him actually the season 2000 going into 2022, maybe 21
okay,
in the Jersey Shore. Speaking of Atlantic City, and
yeah,
he was a gentleman. He was like such a nice guy. He was just on the beach with his kids. And I was like, Coach, wish you a good year. And I love him. I think he's great.
But,
Not because I
the
met him.
Eagles, the fans hate him though, right?
Right. Yeah, he gets a lot of stuff, but come on. What do you want? If he's not good enough, I can't help you. I don't know what you're looking for.
Gotcha. All right, man. Well, on that note,
Thank you.
we'll see what happens tomorrow. Like I said, this will probably be posted after the Super Bowl, so hopefully you're wrong in the prediction,
Yes.
and like go Eagles, right?
Go Eagles. And Matthew, thanks for having me. And I really appreciate the opportunity and all you do. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.